Good evening and welcome. Thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Audrey Lichter, the Executive Director of Chai Mitzvah, the Resource Center for Jewish Engagement. Today's Scholars Circle topic and interview is on the clash of narratives, Zionism Beyond Politics in Jewish Education, featuring Dr. Naya Lekht. Chai Mitzvah is a national organization now celebrating its 17th year. We are the host of Scholars Circle, a Jewish resource center that focuses on building community through Jewish engagement programs. We have over 20 curricula tailored for small group conversation for teens and adults, lay or professionally led. For more information, please visit our website on chaimitzvah.org. The Scholars Circle program was inspired by Scott Shea, our founder and board president, who authored the best-selling book Conspiracy U, A Case Study, which unpacks anti-Zionist conspiracy theories from the left and the right political spectrum. The curriculum was also taught and recorded in a series by Dr. Andrew Pessin, which is also available on our website. The Scholars Circle program hosts lectures by prominent scholars every 2 weeks on topics related to Israel and the Jewish community, geared towards rabbis, educators, and lay leaders who are charged with explaining the complex issues facing the Jewish community. To that end, each lecture will have a resource guide that will be sent to you after the lecture. A recording of each lecture will be accessible on our website and shared with you through email. We are excited to continue the Scholars Circle program and need your support to keep it thriving. Scholars Circle has engaged over 4,000 participants since 10/7. We would like to invite you to sponsor a lecture in honor or memory of a person or organization, and we'll tell all about that honoree and acknowledge them during our introductory remarks. Sponsorships are $500 per lecture, and 100% of this donation will go directly to our brave and dedicated scholars who commit their lives, often at great difficulty and sacrifice on campuses these days, to the study of Israel and anti-Zionism. Your donation will enable us to continue bringing international scholars to you at no charge and to share their expertise on the evolving Jewish world in the aftermath of October 7th. Thank you for all who have contributed. We are grateful to the Laboratory for the Study and Prevention of Global Anti-Semitism at the University of Connecticut for their generous support. For more information about the laboratory, you can contact Professor Dan Weiner, Vice Provost for Global Affairs and Professor of Geography, or Professor Jessica Cooperman, Head of UConn Center for Judaic Studies and Contemporary Jewish Life. To make a donation, please visit chaimitzvah.org and click on the gold menu tab, Scholars Circle, and select Scholars Support Scholars Circle. This will be included in our follow-up emails as well. Thank you for continuing supporting this engaging program for all. Dr. Naya Lekht is a scholar, educator, and writer known for bringing urgency and clarity to the study of anti-Jewish hatred. She earned her PhD in Russian literature from UCLA, where her dissertation examined Holocaust literature with a focus on Babi Yar as a site of collective memory for Russian speakers. Her research on the Holocaust in the Soviet Union informs her work on Soviet anti-Zionism, linking historical patterns of repression to contemporary forms of anti-Jewish hatred. Today, Dr. Lekht partners with Jewish and non-Jewish private schools to develop rigorous, historically grounded curricula on Israel, the Middle East, and Jewish identity, empowering students to think critically and engaging confidently with one of the defining issues of our time. In 2024, she was named one of Jerusalem Post and JFN's top 25 Zionist visionaries. She is the co-founder of Stop Anti-Zionism, an educational initiative addressing the realities students face in K through 12 and higher education through a declaration that names anti-Zionism as today's anti-Semitism. Her writing has appeared in the Jerusalem Post, Tablet, Jewish Journal, Allgemeine, Times of Israel, and she regularly lectures in schools, community institutions, and public forums on the history of anti-Jewish movements and how to teach this material with clarity and moral courage. We welcome questions anytime. Please use the Zoom's Q&A box to put your question there. Tonight, we will have a conversation with Dr. Lekht. Dr. Lekht, welcome to Scholars Circle.
Thank you so much for having me, Audrey. I'm very, very honored and privileged to have this conversation with you this evening. Thank you.
So let's start by learning something about you. Tell us about where you were born, what your growing up was like, and how you got involved in this topic of anti-Zionism.
I was born in the former Soviet Union, what is today Ukraine, and we came to the United States of America in 1989. I was just a very young girl, almost about 6 years old. And the reason that I share this when I do give talks is not because I want people to know my biography per se, but it is important as it has informed my professional life. My parents, like about 2 million Soviet Jews, left the Soviet Union due to repression, both street level anti-Semitism and state-sponsored anti-Zionism, as well as communism and the repression around that, forced so many Soviet Jews to have to flee the Soviet Union. So I grew up really with hearing about my parents' experience. And the interesting thing is, as a child, you kind of listen to the repository of your family stories, and they kind of go in one ear and out the other. But somehow these stories of what my parents went through, and I could share a few, they really impressed upon me a deep sense of responsibility. Um, and so when we came to America, we went to Los Angeles, and my parents actually enrolled me in a Jewish day school, a reform school, and then switched to conservative. So I'm in many ways a product of Jewish education through high school. And when I went to college up in Northern California at UC Santa Cruz, it was the beginning of the 2000s. And that is when I give talks on the anti-Zionism in the United States of America, I do date its appearance to the early 2000s because of three major world events. The Durban Conference in South Africa, 9/11, and the Second Intifada. And these three world events they became a catalyst that then provided the necessary conditions for activists to then bring and center Palestine into higher education. And so, how am I going to connect this now to my parents' story? So, as an undergraduate student, I encountered anti-Zionism, and I knew it was anti-Zionism, not because at age 18 or 19, was a scholar on the history of anti-Zionism, but of what my parents went through. And so when I saw it, I knew right away what I was looking at. It was completely anti-Zionism. And what was very disturbing, Audrey, was that when I would go to Jewish professionals on my campus to try to ring the alarm bells and try to tell them that anti-Zionism is here, my parents had to flee from it. Most professors who were in the Jewish studies, most Jewish professionals on my campus ignored it and told me to ignore it and told me that if I was going to speak about it, I could make it worse. I could endanger the safety of Jewish student life on my campus. And that if it will all go away, we just need to kind of put our heads down.
Mm.
And when they said that phrase, like put your head down, I remembered my father who said that when he lived in the Soviet Union as a Jew, he had to always live with his head kind of down. And I said, no, I'm not going to do that. I live in the United States of America in a free country. My parents brought me here, not so that I could continue and not resist this toxic ideology, this lethal ideology, but to confront it, to reveal it, to study it. And so then I decided, yes, I pursued a PhD in Russian literature, but I was always interested in the story of Soviet Jewish experience, which led me, of course, to studying the roots of anti-Zionism. And its genealogy is the Soviet Union. Um, Isabella Tabarovsky has written quite prolifically on that topic. But what I saw and what I continue to see for the last 2 decades was that until October 7th, the Jewish community was quite reticent. They were quite unwilling to address anti-Zionism, sometimes uncomfortable to do it, sometimes saying anti-Zionism is not a form of Jew hatred, it is just political criticism. Anti-Zionism has nothing to do with anti-Semitism. There was something that occurred, I think, in American Jewish life. Bret Stephens coined this the October 8th Jew.
Mm,
I think it was in a Sapir journal that he wrote that. But there is this phenomenon in American Jewish life where October 7th became a kind of watershed date for Jews in the diaspora, where they were forced to kind of have to contend with the fact that their silence on on anti-Zionism, or rather their lack of knowledge around anti-Zionism, has endangered their own communities, our own communities in the diaspora. So I'll stop there.
yeah. Okay. So there's a lot to unpack here, but uh, let's start with political anti-Zionism. What is the difference, or what is the problem by
Mhm.
defining hatred for or dislike of Israel's policies? It's a political issue. What's
Mhm.
the problem with that in your way in which you frame
Yeah.
anti-Zionism as being anti-Semitism?
Mhm. Well, I don't think I think it's today's anti-Semitism, and I'm happy to explain that further. But I think you're asking the question, the most important question, which is that it looks like politics. It looks like a political position, but it's masquerading as a political position when in reality it's a demonization project. And I'm using that word demonization very intentionally. In the year 2017, when I started to develop curriculum for both universities and high schools on the history of anti-Jewish movements, there wasn't much out there. Most was on Holocaust education. In that year, in 2017, the great Rabbi Jonathan Sacks delivered a very important talk in which he said that anti-Semitism is a mutating virus. And I recall that was very critical for me in my development because I asked myself the following question. Well, if it is a mutating virus, why? Why does it mutate? What is it about this Jew hatred that has the capability of becoming this shapeshifter? So I'm going to get to the question about politics. Because of that lecture that he gave, I developed something known as the three era framework. So, in the three era framework, Jews have been demonized across three dominant eras. The first being anti-Judaism, the second being anti-Semitism, and today, last 70 or so years, if right, is anti-Zionism. Each era constructs the Jew as a villain. But here's the most important part. The way that we are constructed as a villain is in direct opposition of what society or civilization deems to be moral. So in the era of anti-Judaism, morality was understood as Christian. It was a predominantly Christian world, and so we were literally Christ killers. We were killers of the faith of Christ, of Christianity. Well, society post-Enlightenment evolves and morality shifts. Post-Enlightenment is a world of science, reason, rationale, and there emerges the science around race. And this idea of classifying human beings, categorizing human beings based on race and racial features. In this era, we were once again recast as violators, but in this era, it wasn't so much blood libel and Christ killer. In the era of anti-Semitism, we were constructed as demons uh, by being in opposition to purity of race. So we were violators of the purity of race. Well, in one article that I wrote a few months ago, I argue that it takes often a catastrophic event to compel the world to go through a moral realignment. That catastrophic event would have been the Holocaust. The Holocaust forced the world to kind of have to go back and think, well, was that a moral way to categorize human beings based on race? And of course, they discarded that, rightfully so. In this era of anti-Zionism, the morality is understood around human rights. Human rights by nature lends itself to political discourse because human rights is about how you govern a people, how you govern a state, right? Today's church is the United Nations, if you are following kind of that analogy across those three eras. So how do you violate human rights? Racism is a violation of human rights. Apartheid is a violation of human rights. Nazism is a violation of human rights. White supremacy, right? Um, all of these terms On the surface, they look like they belong in the discipline of political science, but they've been weaponized. They've been weaponized just like Christianity was weaponized against Jews in the era of anti-Judaism. Today's morality of human rights constructs the Jew vis-a-vis Israel, vis-a-vis Zionism, as being guilty of violating the purity, not of race now, but the purity of human rights. So, a lot of people who are engaging in this conversation, rightfully so, they are confused. They think, well, why is calling Israel a settler colonial state or an apartheid state? Why does that constitute anti-Semitism? And in many ways, Audrey, it doesn't, because anti-Semitism, if we're following that three eras, is constructing the Jew as being subhuman, as a violator of a purity of race. Today's construction, today's demonization of the Jew is around violation of the human rights. And here I have to hand it over and really give a big bow to the Soviet Union, because the Soviet Union they were the ones that coded Israel with all of these crimes against humanity. Why do I give them credit? Because after World War II, the Soviets, they were terrible at governing their own people, terrible, but they were very brilliant propagandists, and they were very brilliant at fabricating narratives. They scanned the world, the globe, mostly the West, after World War II, and they correctly identified an attitude emerging in the 1960s, in the 1950s, that was against war. Think about the 1960s and the anti-war movement in the United States of America. There was suddenly an embrace of third worldism, of the subaltern group of people, and indigeneity. And so the Soviets, who, of course, their great enemy number one is the United States of America, maligned America through Israel by coding Israel as guilty of all these violations of human rights. So that's why many people are confused. They think, why is that? I don't understand why calling Israel an apartheid state constitutes anti-Semitism. Well, it constitutes a form of Jew hatred because it is a demonization. And let me say one more thing before another question you may ask. This idea about criticism, that we are allowed to criticize a state. Absolutely. Everybody's allowed to criticize a state. However, all of these libels, because that's what they are, apartheid, genocide, colonialism, racism, Zionism is racism, Israel is a Nazi state. This is not criticism because it's a checkmate move. And why is it a checkmate move? Because after deploying that libel, there's nowhere to go. There's nowhere to go after such a libel gets generated. I often, when I speak to both adults and students, I often ask, imagine there was a school in New York that had a full-on Nazi curriculum, that every morning in that school they did the Heil Hitler salute. What do we do with that school? How do we criticize that school in a healthy way? And my students always say, well, no, there's no criticism. You got to shut that school down.
Mhm.
Right? That's not criticism. You understand? So when the criticism of any people, not just Jews, is totalizing, it's saying that their existence by virtue of existing is a crime. That's what it is. Apartheid is a crime. Genocide is a crime. These are
Mhm.
not criticisms. This is a checkmate move.
Mhm. Let's take a step back and let's talk to us about what you found in the way in which Israel is taught. And anti-Semitism is taught, anti-Zionism is taught in the schools that you've been working with. What is the problem?
Well, I want to take a few more steps back and even talk about my own self, because I mentioned that intentionally that I went to Jewish day schools, so I'm a product of that education. Um, what were we taught about Israel? We were taught very little, by the way, because the Jewish day schools, up until very recently, did not want to actually teach about Israel and the conflict. They stayed away from that, but they were forced, due to after October 7th, to have to create curriculum due to social media and students getting basically demonized. All a student has to do is, post a picture saying Shabbat Shalom and Free Palestine gets, you know, commented. Um, so not very much was taught to us. But if I had to think, and I've been studying and researching, not just in the schools that I work with, but more broadly, many Jewish day schools. The way that it is taught is that Israel was born in 1948. Herzl had a dream, and it's amazing. It's an amazing place. There are beautiful beaches in Tel Aviv. I mean, I'm really simplifying, but I'm trying to kind of relay at its core what was being taught for many, many years. Israel produces cherry tomatoes. Um, there is a vibrant diversity in Israel, but few students can name the countries that border Israel, okay? But what we were taught is that Herzl had this dream in 1897. There was the World Zionist Congress. 1948, Israel was born.
Hmm.
And if I didn't have my parents who educated me on the history of Jews, Jewish history, I would I would have a hard time understanding what is anti-Zionism and what is Zionism. I'll tell you another thing. Zionism, the way that it is taught, is mostly taught as a political movement. That I have identified as one of the biggest almost tragedies within the Jewish educational world, both formal education and informal education, is most people, when they answer what is Zionism, they will say it is a political movement born in the 19th century. At best, the answer you'll get, and I still think it's not a good answer, is Zionism is a self-determination is a movement that believes in the self-determination of the Jewish people in their ancestral homeland. And I think that is incomplete as well, because you can be against a movement and not be anti-Semitic. Once you frame Zionism as an ideology or as a movement, then you're getting away from something much more important. It's our identity. It's an expression of our peoplehood. That was not taught to me, and that usually is not taught in many Jewish day schools, that Zionism is an expression of Jewish peoplehood. Many of my students with whom I work with, when I ask them, what is Zionism? What have you learned about Zionism? They say, I mean, it's a little funny, but they say it's like flavors of ice cream. There was religious Zionism, secular Zionism, cultural Zionism, revisionist Zionism. And so I say, oh, so that's interesting. What do you gather from that type of categories? And they say to me, my students, that these are different political positions about Zionism. And inside, I'm like, because it's not a political position. And we are, really it's very detrimental to our ability to articulate that Zionism is core to who we are as Jewish people if we continue to perpetuate that it is an ideology. And I get it. It's kind of an unfortunate word because it consists of Zion and ism, and that suffix really weighs it down because ism is something that describes an ideology. So I
Hmm.
get that the word itself is a bit unfortunate, but it is incumbent upon us, and we can do it. And I am doing it in classrooms where re, we reclaim the story of the Jewish people through Zionism.
Hmm. Um, you laid out something in a talk that I was listening to, which I thought was really quite brilliant. When you said that, and to go back to this idea of what is abhorrent to people or what is the most important aspect of a time, then the Jew represents that in
Mhm.
the negative. So you talked about a few eras of, so you said there was the blood libel time, and when Jews were accused of killing Christ, and that was, and then there was Jews were accused of world domination, and then Jews were demonized, and then Jews were accused of dual loyalty, and then Jews were dehumanized,
Mhm.
and then Jews were accused of being moneylenders and avarice. So you took that paradigm, I thought that was brilliant, and then you kind of juxtaposed it to all the different times of
Mhm.
since millennial, since the beginning that
Mhm.
we have from, from the very beginning. Um, so what are you doing with that? How does that work into when you teach about Zion and you teach about the Jewish, that Zionism is part of our identity, and yet these characteristics are constantly leveled on Jews. How does that relate to your
Yeah.
curriculum?
Yeah, it's a good question. What you're talking about is a talk I gave a few summers ago at ISGAP. And most of my writing and education is informed by the American Jewish communities struggling with understanding what anti-Zionism is. I've been watching them struggle for as I say, since 2002, 2001. Um, and I think that there's another reason, and I want to go back to that, why the American Jewish community failed to recognize anti-Zionism. But one of the things that I constantly get challenged, people challenge me, is that anti-Zionism is criticism. Back to that conversation that we just had. And the six tropes, so what you are discussing or referring to is a talk that I gave a few summers ago at Oxford, where I thought to myself, okay, there are these three eras, anti-Judaism, anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism. How can I help people understand that this has very little to do with criticism and it has everything to do with demonization? And this is also, again, inspired by Rabbi Sachs. And he said, well, remember he says anti-Semitism is a virus. So I said, okay, well, can a virus have a unique DNA code? I thought to myself, yes, it does. And I thought, well, what is that unique DNA code of Jew hatred? And I remember I identified these six things, but they mutate. So, for instance, blood libel, demonization, dehumanization, world domination, dual loyalty, and greed. And these six tropes, what's remarkable is that I can go to the 14th century, the 19th century, or today and find blood libel today. It just is evolved. So, for instance, in many ways, the genocide libel is the updated blood libel.
Mm.
The colonizer libel is the updated world domination. The Jews want to control, right? They want to take over. Um, so, so the reason I had developed that approach was to help Jews become less confused that this is not about criticism. Criticism does not demonize. Criticism does not result in murder, right? Criticism should never result in murder. And here, of course, I'm thinking of the young people, the two couple that was engaged, who were murdered walking out of the Jewish Museum in Washington, D.C. And minutes or seconds before they were murdered, the man yelled, "Free, free, free Palestine."
Mhm.
He was captured by an ideology, by anti-Zionism that demonizes Jews. They didn't walk out of the is like, let me even be the most kind of, you know, give them the benefit of the doubt. They didn't walk out of the Israel embassy. They walked out of a Jewish museum, right? Or even before October 7th, in Manhattan, there was a sukkah during Sukkot, and somebody spray painted "Free Gaza" um, on a sukkah, which is a Jewish symbol.
Mhm.
So you see, it's so obvious that it is a demonization project. Now, to your question, how do you pair that education about anti-Jewish movements, but also reclaim Zionism as integral to our identity? This presents an interesting kind of challenge because the anti-Semite or the anti-Zionist never kills the Jew as a Jew. It's always the Jew as, as capitalist, as Christ killer, and today as Zionist. So they construct a demon, and so they construct this demon out of Zionists in order to then say, well, we don't have a problem with Jews. It's the Zionists. It's the Zionists. Doesn't matter that most Pew, by the way, Pew Research, again, before October 7th in 2021, 8 out of 10 Americans, Jews, support Israel. So Israel is integral to Jewish identity. But so the challenge, Audrey, is that whilst I'm trying to impart onto my students the beauty of Jewish peoplehood in that word Zionism, I'm also very much aware that the Jew hater maligns the Jew and constructs a demon out of us through the term Zionism. So there's an actually interesting kind of debate happening right now, which is a lot. Some people believe that we should even retire the term Zionism altogether. Some
Mm.
believe, look, Zionism fulfilled its purpose. It was the create Israel exists, enough. Yes, in that sense, that's the ism part. If you're looking at Zionism as a political ideology, then perhaps yes, it has fulfilled its purpose. But Zionism, as I understand it, is that expression of the Jewish people's longing, the Jewish people's connection. When I teach, I often teach the poem, My Heart is in the East and I am in the West, by Yehuda Halevi in the 12th century. And I'm sure the term that I'm using is anachronistic because the word Zionism was coined in 1892. But when I talk to my students, I say he was a Zionist, right?
Hmm.
He didn't think of a state, perhaps, but for him, Zionism, and for us, the Jewish people, it is the expression of our peoplehood. And here's why I want to say something about this. I think, and please, if you disagree, please push back. I think that perhaps American Jewry missed anti-Zionism because anti-Zionism is an assault on Jewish national origin. And American Jewry did not see themselves, or perhaps still do not, as a nation, but rather as a religious minority. And this happened, of course, mostly because of the German Jews who came in the 1880s, most of them being Reform. There was a very famous Pittsburgh Manifesto that was issued, I believe, in 1885.
Hmm.
And these Jews, these German Jews, issued this almost like a white paper of what it would mean to be a Jew now in this golden Medina in this new land. And one of their points that they write is that they no longer see themselves as a nation, but rather as a religion. And I get it because what is America? America is this place that a refuge for people seeking religious freedom. That's really the birth of it. So I understand why they aligned that value with the value of America. But the problem is that that thinking, that lens, that framing of Judaism as only a religion and not as an ethnicity and nationality has had a detrimental effect on many generations because, as I said, anti-Zionism is an assault on national origin. Anti-Judaism is an assault on the religion, anti-Semitism on our constructed race, but anti-Zionism is about our nationhood. And if we Jews do not see ourselves as a nation, we will miss it. And for everyone on this call, and maybe for you, Audrey, this is my challenge. Ask American Jews of all ages one question. Where did Jewish people come from? And you'll be very surprised by their answers because most will say Jews come from everywhere. And then I say, no, 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 not where Jews lived. Where did Jewish people come from? And sometimes I get Israel like that. Um, that is the work that I see myself doing. This, not just myself, I think we all need to do this with our children, is to understand Jewish people come from the land of Israel. The remarkable thing is that when you ask the question to Christians, where do Jewish people come from? The answer is immediate. They say Jerusalem or Zion. They know.
Hmm. We've done a poor job of educating ourselves, especially in the United States, on Jewish history.
Mm,
Just, that Israel started in 1948 or Israel started, with Herzl. First of all, we also ignore the entire Mizrahi experience, and I think October 8th was, quite a awakening for what for Jews in America
yeah.
because of this problem that an age-old debate in America about can you be Jewish without believing in the sanctity or the importance of the state of Israel? Can you divorce yourself from Israel as a Jew and be a religious Jew or a Jew, an ethnic Jew, but not believe that we need an Israel as a political state? And I always say that, just read Jewish history, learn Jewish history, and that will answer that question. But we haven't done a very good job at teaching that to our children. I have some questions here that I'd like to get to. Um,
Okay.
so I'd like to start with, we should have probably done this very first. How do you define anti-Zionism? What is that? How do you define that?
And anti-Zionism is the latest movement to demonize Jews vis-a-vis Israel.
Okay.
It's a demonization project.
So there's another question. I know that you were involved in in California public schools and what's happening there. Roz asks, oppressor oppressed, settler colonialism narratives are at the heart of ethnic studies in California public schools. Do you have a strategy to address this?
Yeah, that is. But remember what I said earlier. All these narratives about oppressor and oppressed, they come from human rights. That's how we are constructing. We have a very, I'm okay going on record and saying this. I believe we have a very unhealthy, in the West, in the secular West, I will say, we have an unhealthy paradigm for what is moral. The oppressor is always moral, and the
Mhm.
oppressed is, excuse me, the oppressor is always immoral, and the oppressed can get away with anything, literally.
Mhm.
But it goes back to how we are thinking morally. So to answer that question, what do you do? Um, it's very difficult because the truth of the matter is that anti-Semitism, and here I'm using the term broadly, not just the second era, anti-Semitism as a whole, it's not really about the Jews. Anti-Semitism is a symptom of a societal breakdown. Our society is very sick. You know, when the Nazis were marching with the Heil Hitler on the streets of Germany and screaming death to the Jews and screaming Judenrein, Judenrein, what they were really, you know what they were really saying is help me, help me. We're sick. Our body, our civilization has become sick. When they are screaming free Palestine from the river to the sea, Khaybar Yahud, which is another term, Arabic term, by the way, which is also genocidal. What these civilizations at their core are actually screaming, they're screaming for help because our morality has been corrupted and completely, it's demoralized, actually. It's not morality. So to answer the question about, I was involved. So in the state of California in the year 2016, the many bad faith actors put forth a curriculum called Ethnic Studies or Liberated Ethnic Studies Model Curriculum, 2016. It wasn't until 2020 that it was the state of California mandated it. What does that mean? Every student, if they in public schools in California, in order to receive a diploma, has to take ethnic studies. And on the face of it, what's so wrong? Ethnic studies. Okay. But of course, people started to look inside and started to study it. And I don't know who asked, but the person's absolutely correct. What happened was through that toxic oppressor oppressed binary, Israel is seen as the violator, right? Just like we're again recast as the demon of the day. And so the problem was is that we were running to the state and we were running to the school and screaming anti-Semitism, anti-Semitism, and they don't understand because our interpretive lens for understanding Jew hatred has been totally captured by Holocaust education, which, by the way, I did my dissertation on the Holocaust. My grandfather's a Holocaust survivor. I understand the necessity of teaching about the Holocaust, but I'm also very well aware, and I just published a piece in the Wall Street Journal that Holocaust education has actually kept us from being able to address post-Holocaust anti-Semitism. When we go to our schools, administrators, government officials, and talk about anti-Semitism, they don't understand why calling Israel, let's say, a colonial state, why is the oppressor oppressed binary framework? Why does that lead to anti-Semitism? They don't get it. They don't get it because they've been brought up on version two of that three eras. Our job is Jew hatred has evolved. We have our language has not. What I do a lot of things, but what I would love to implore everybody on this call is to have this join me on a paradigm shift to say we are living in the anti-Zionist era. Not to say that we shouldn't learn about the Holocaust, but it's not going to prepare us because Israel is not being demonized by being constructed as subhuman. It's just not that's not how Nazi symbols it's not that's not what Israel is being accused of. Well, they're accused of being Nazis, but you understand what I'm saying. So the California situation is really terrible because, and I was intentional about that year, 2016, it's 2026, that's 10 years, right? We are so behind, and we're still using a framework, an interpretive lens when we talk about the problem. from anti-Semitism when we're really talking about is anti-Zionism, and they don't understand what anti-Zionism is. It is on us to educate people.
Um, so there's a person that asks, how do you interpret and address those Jews, about a third of those who voted for Mandani, who link anti-Zionism with every progressive movement? Did we lose these people because of our liberal roots? How do you explain the Jewish, so many people voted for Mandani and so many people, it's conflated with all kinds of liberal causes.
Yeah. Well, it's a very big question, and I'd like to take it up into two parts. I want to actually challenge us all in the way that we think about Judaism as being let's say, a progressive religion. And here's what I'm going to share with you, because you asked about Jewish education before. I grew up in a temple, a Reform temple, Temple Emmanuel. Um, and on our wall was this phrase, Tzedek, Tzedek Tirdof. Justice, justice shall you pursue.
Mhm.
And my entire life, until I was about 25, I would say, I thought that this is the entire phrase taken from the Torah, that it is about the fact that as Jews, we have to repair the world, tikkun olam, and as Jews, we are compelled to seek justice. That's our North Star. Now, when I'm 25 years old, or maybe a little younger, I go to Chabad, and I learned that actually that phrase has been truncated. Because the entire phrase is, justice, justice shall you pursue in the land that I, Hashem, have given unto you. This line comes from a part in the Torah where the Jewish people are about to go into the land of Israel. Moses is giving them the laws, and God is telling it's about how to be sovereigns. It's about how to rule justly as Jews in their country. It is not universal justice.
Mhm.
And that is the problem in this progressive, I think the capture of progressivism within the Jewish movement is that, again, because our education didn't teach the richness, the entirety of the Jewish liturgy, the Jewish texts, and presented it to us piecemeal, we believe that, oh, our job is to repair the world and however we see fit, and our job is to pursue justice however we see fit. But actually, no, if the whole line is about being sovereigns, and this is important, sovereignty is about power. Jewish people in the diaspora are uncomfortable with power. One of the things that makes many progressive Jews uncomfortable about Israel is that Israel does have power. And Ruth Weiss, the great, professor of Yiddish literature, wrote a very important book on Jews and power. And among many of her claims, one was that the Jewish people lost their sovereignty in 70 AD when the Romans kicked them out. And this put them in a 2,000-year diaspora. Those 2,000 years, they were at the whims of a power of beat, right? The host countries. So they developed a very fraught, vexed relationship to power. Think about it for just a second. We've only had our sovereignty very little in relation to 2,000 years. So we're still kind of figuring out, what does it mean to have sovereignty, to have Jewish power? There are many people who are uncomfortable with Jewish power. And I know that because many professors who are in the Jewish studies will deploy that Israel is an ethno-state, a Jewish supremacy state. By why? Because it's a Jewish country. And that makes them very uncomfortable. So that is an issue that we should deal with in terms of our education. And I shared with you that until I was in my 20s, I didn't even realize that the entire line captures not really universal justice. It's very particular. It's
Mhm.
about God giving commandments to the Jewish people about how we should have power and how we should rule. Now, the Jews who voted for Mamdani, that is with, I think, 30%. The Jews who legitimize anti-Zionism. What do we make of those Jews? Um, the truth of the matter is that it is a myth that Jews cannot participate in anti-Jewish movements. Think about from the time of the Greeks, the Hellenized Jews, the Maccabees, right, who fought. By the way, they didn't just fight with the Greeks; they fought with fellow Jews who were Hellenized.
Mhm.
So this is not a new phenomenon. Likewise, in the early 20th century, when the Soviet state was forming, there was a section, a Jewish section that was formed known as Yevsektsiya, or the Jewish section of the Communist Party. These were Jews who attacked fellow Jews on the street, who helped to throw fellow Jews into prison for the crime of studying Hebrew, going to temple, or wanting to be in part of Zionist movements. Why am I sharing this? Because I think it feels so unnatural, as it should. Like, why would a Jewish person partake in a movement that seeks to destroy a Jewish part of Jewish identity or its homeland? It makes no sense. But if you zoom out and kind of consider the vast Jewish history, this is not a new problem. There have been many instances, but I want to say that they're the minority. They really are not a majority. And people forget that they're a loud minority. They are loud. But we give them a lot of, I think, attention, and we give them a lot of legitimacy by talking about them. Whereas I think, of course, we need to kind of try to diagnose why so that doesn't happen. But they do not speak for the entire Jewish community. And that really is something that we need to stress over and over again.
Um, so there's so many layers of this conversation. What I'm getting from what I'm getting, one is that Zion, Israel, is integral to our identity as Jews, and we have to. That's baseline. From there, you can then have a conversation about your political stance on Israel, or where you sit in terms of Israel as a country, the decisions made by the government, and those kinds of things. But fundamentally, we're missing the basis that Zion is our identity as a Jewish people. And that is the piece that we didn't do a very good job with, especially in America, because as you said, we were so grateful for this country and to be able to be Americans.
Mhm.
Of course, we should have learned that from Germany, uh, you know. But anyway, so we're in such a fragile moment as Jewish people right now in America. I think so fragile and trying to figure out this identity again. Like, where do we sit in America as we see the left and the right coming at
Mm.
us on both sides, um, attacking Israel.
Yeah.
Um, it's a very precarious moment for us, I think. There are some other questions, many questions. Some people would like you to talk a little bit more about your strategies in terms of curriculum, in terms of what you're doing for us to revamp this curriculum and to kind of get young people with a better understanding of Jewish history and Zionism.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that. I want to just say one more thing. As you were saying, I think you said something very important and also very simple. You said Zion is baseline, and I think you're absolutely correct. There are certain things, like when you think about a curriculum and building out a curriculum, you always think, well, what are my learning objectives? But then what are some things that are just non-negotiable? Like, this is what I'm going to teach. And one of those things, of course, is Jewish identity. But how am I going to teach that Jewish identity? I'm going to teach it through Soloveitchik. Soloveitchik came up with the idea of Jewish identity as a triangle. Um, each point represents a different part of what it means, a pillar of Jewish identity: people, Torah or God, and land. This is when I build out my curriculum, I am completely beholden to that model of Jewish identity, because at the end of the day, it is a conversation about how they see themselves as Jews. And let me share something else with you and others on this call. Many students say to me, well, Dr. Lecht, for 2,000 years, we didn't have Israel. Are you saying we weren't Jews?
Mm.
Do we really need Israel to be Jews? Are you saying we weren't a Jewish people? This is a challenge. So I respond, and happy if anybody has a better response, but I've been thinking about it. I said, "Yeah, it's true, you're right. But That doesn't mean that our return is not justified. And think about how we lived as Jews, and think about how we lived and how we were able to fully express our identity. You're right, we were Jews. But how many of us came with those three full selves? People, land, and God. And how many of us, like my father, who told me that he lived in the Soviet Union with his head always bowed down? You're right. For 2,000 years, Jews were Jews, but they were bowed down. I don't want to be that Jew.
Hmm.
So, so that's kind of a challenge that the students get. But when I think about my curriculum or the curriculum that I is that should be being taught in our schools, it's not just about the Arab-Israeli conflict. It really is an understanding of who we are as Jewish people. And that means a history. I'm just going to tell you right now, most of them don't know where the term Palestine comes from. So I have a whole lesson, a unit on the term Palestine, the history of that term. They didn't know that the Romans gave the name Palestine to Judea, but why? Because the Philistines were the arch enemies. But why? Because the Romans wanted to shame the Jews and erase their history. Most of them also don't know that until the mid 20th century, that term Palestine meant Jewish.
Mhm.
It meant Jewish. So, for instance, uh, the famous German philosopher Immanuel Kant said in I don't remember exactly which paper he wrote, but he wrote, "Among us live Palestinians." He meant Jews,
Mhm.
right? My mother in the Soviet Union was told on several occasions to go back to Palestine because Jews, Palestine. So part of reclaiming our identity is about under having a deep historical awareness and understanding of language, how language can be weaponized against Jews, how language can evolve. The term Palestine evolves now that many people believe there was a historic Arab Muslim Palestine. Another thing that I teach in my curriculum, before I even begin with the conflict, and even before I talk about identity, is I want students to have awareness about the region itself. So there's a wonderful exercise that anybody can do, which is go and look at the flags of the Middle East. And something that will pop out right away is that the Arab countries pretty much have the same colors, red, green, black, sometimes white. And I went and I did a research. Why is that? Because the green, not the green, the white and the black, they symbolize a caliphate. Umayyad Caliphate, Abbasid Caliphate. Each caliphate is a colonial entity that extended its reach into certain parts of the Levant, the Middle East, North Africa. And so, my students, one thing that I want them to understand is how did the Muslims come to the Levant is through colonialism. So,
Mhm.
right, to understand that story as well. But I am informed by that triangle that Rabbi Soloveitchik had put forth, and I don't recall the name of the essay. I could send it later, but it really inspired me in helping students see that their Judaism consists of Torah and God, that's the commandments, people, that we are a nation, and a nation is tied to land and land.
Um, so just simply, how do you deal with somebody who says, well, then you have a dual loyalty? Is that there was a book that was just written that we need to embrace that.
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
wrote that book, but I just read that book. But yeah, I mean, maybe dual loyalty is like okay.
No,
Oh.
I just think it's like all libels. You see, we don't have time for this today, but I give a talk on the nature of libels.
Mm.
All libels are rooted in a little truth and then twisted. That's why they work so well. For instance, the blood libel. The blood libel, there was a boy who was murdered in the 12th century, in 1170, in the town of Norwich in England. That boy was crucified. It was terrible what happened to this boy. And that boy did live next to Jewish neighbors. Okay, that provided the necessary conditions. Of course, there was already tension between the Jews and the
Mhm.
English and the Christians. Um, the necessary conditions to take this story and weaponize it against Jews. The issue of dual loyalty. You know, Stalin. Golda Meir came to Moscow in 1948. And he had just, by the way, the Soviet Union had just voted yes for the reestablishment of the State of Israel. So she comes to it's in Moscow, and he was taken completely aback because hundreds, if not thousands, of Jews came to see her. And he said, "Oh my God, I have a fifth column on my hands. These Jews, they're dual loyalists." Now, from the perspective of Stalin, you could see, yeah, that why are these Jews, gathering and greeting a foreign leader as if they are their own leader? So you could see, but the truth of the matter is that it's so easy to debunk, and you know this perhaps even as well as I do. I hate the term pro-Israel, but any pro-Israel rally, any is has this Israel flags together with American flags.
Mhm.
Israel flags together with American flags. By the way, Dreyfus was accused of dual loyalty, of being a traitor. That's actually what happened to him. When they ripped off his amulets and his awards and his medals, he screamed, "Viva la France!" And while they stripped him and shamed him publicly, he yelled, "Long live France." That's how loyal actually he was to France. Jews actually are extremely loyal to the places that they live. But Jews can also be loyal to, it's like, can you be loyal to your husband and your mother at the same time? Yeah, you can. But Jews is just an unbelievable libel, this dual loyalty. And of course, you can try to justify it by saying, look at these Jews with their Israel flags. Well, look at these Jews with their Israel flags and the American flags.
Well, we are, there's so much and so many questions, and there's so much more to discuss. And the good news is that we will see you again in March, March 24th, for another Scholar Circle lecture from you. And that will be a formal lecture, not a discussion with me, but a formal lecture with slides. And we'll hear more from you. Your work is amazing, and you're amazing, and
Thank you.
everything that you're doing. On the front and on, working with kids, which is the future for sure. We've got to do some serious triage, serious work. Okay, so thank you so much for this evening's conversation. For everyone, our next Scholars Circle will feature Rina Nassar first on Faith Under Fire, Jewish Student Identity and Expression on Today's Campuses. And that lecture will take place on Wednesday, February 11th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. So we'll see you all then, and we'll see Dr. Lekht again in March. So thank you all. And if we didn't get to all the questions, we're going to send them to you. And they're, they're a way for people to contact you if they want to engage more.
Sure, I'll leave
We'll put that in our follow.
I'll leave my email.
Uh,
But also, I co-founded something called Stop Antizionism, so you can find me at stopaz.org and take a look at what we're doing.
is there anything else that you'd like people to know? How to contact you, or what you're up to, or follow you someplace?
I'm on Twitter, I'm on Instagram. I just published a piece with Casey Babb from Canada in the Wall Street Journal on Holocaust education. Um, yeah, and you can always email me. I'm pretty good about responding. So I
Okay.
welcome any questions. I know we didn't get to all. Thank you so
All right.
much, Hi Mitzvah,
Yeah.
for having me. Audrey, thanks so much.
Okay. Okay. Great conversation. Okay, everybody, we'll see you again in a couple of weeks on February 11th, 7 p.m. For our next Scholar Circle lecture with Dr. Rina Nasser first. Okay. Take care, everyone. Good night.